Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to be going over the latest stuff on the Israeli-Hamas war. And I'll probably do another video, hopefully today, on the Zohar passage about the 70-day countdown on the 6th month of the 25th day of the 6th day for the Messianic era. 2023 did not have that happen, but it did have something that was very weird, and it coincided with 9/11. It happened on the second day of the 25th day of the 6th month. So that's something that we need to look into. And if you take 7 days out, 70 days out from I think it's 11:30. I'll have to double check that. But if you take it 70 days out from 11:30, it lands on the actual Friday, so the eve of the Sabbath before Yom Kippur, which is a special day. So some weird stuff happened in 2023. All right, now let's play. A lot has happened over the weekend, which I didn't do any recordings. It's November 13th at 9 o'clock or so. So it's this is the pro-Palestinian protest flood Midtown service from Grand Central Limited. Okay, this is the riot that ensued by Grand Central. So let's play the local news, Channel 7.
Here's breaking news from Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
And that breaking news tonight at Grand Central Terminal. Grand Central closed for a time because of thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters trying to get in. They've been marching around Midtown for the past several hours. This all started around 5 o'clock this afternoon at Columbus Circle. Several thousand strong. They were calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, among other things. They made their way across Central Park South to Fifth Avenue. And when they tried to march down Fifth Avenue, New York cops blocked the way. So instead, they marched over to Park Avenue and eventually made their way down and over to Times Square. And for the second night in a row, protesters ended up at New York Times building. Tonight, some of them threw red paint on the New York Times building. And that's when they marched to Grand Central. When they arrived, they were greeted with locked doors. Officials closed many of the entrances to keep them out. Some protesters began kicking doors.
If you do so voluntarily, no charges will be placed against you. If you remain in the roadway and refuse to utilize the sidewalk, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct.
When the protesters lingered, police had that warning for them. The NYPD did end up making some arrests, but tonight no word on how many. Right now, there is limited service at Grand Central.
Okay, now
This is breaking news from Channel 7
the next thing that we're going to talk about is Fox News Business. And a warning from one of the Tom Homan.
World right now is because it's not stocks, real estate, or crypto. It's actually on YouTube, and I'm not talking
outraged residents in Chicago, making it clear. Hey.
So that first video is just proof positive what I was saying about the protesters with the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish, anti-Christian, anti-American. You know, you have people taking down American flags that were on some of the posts. We have these posts right on the corner of around Grand Central. And sometimes there's these small little flags that are on there, American flags. They may have been put there during Veterans Day, but I think they're normally there. And, you know, you have people trying to pull that down, or, you know, people trying to actually break the wooden doors on the front entrance of Grand Central. And if you remember, for the ones that are older, Grand Central back during, you know, the 70s was really bad, right? and it was JFK's wife that ended up creating a foundation to restore Grand Central, because they wanted to tear it down, right, and do what they did to Penn Station. So so they saved it, and it turned into a really nice place. But here again, you have people that will go out of their way to try to destroy property. And I said, this thing's gonna get worse, and it's gonna eat itself. It's more than just about Israel.
That's in Chicago, making it clear, hey, they don't want to be considered a sanctuary city anymore. We'll take.
Do you, as residents of Chicago, believe that we should remain a sanctuary city?
We have the ideal guest to address this situation. His name is Tom Homan, and he knows a lot about the border. My question is, Tom, if they did take away sanctuary city status in Chicago, what would that mean?
Well, first of all, I mean the city be a lot safer, because every illegal alien in the city of Chicago that commits a crime right now gets released back in the community to reoffend against the very community they live in, the immigrant community. So this will allow ICE to go into Cook County Jail, and those who are in the country legally will detain on them, and when Cook County's done with them, arrest them and deport them. Not only remove them from the community so they can't reoffend, remove them from the country.
So at the moment, that they are a sanctuary city, so ICE can't go get them.
No, if you think about this, the local law enforcement locks them in a jail cell because of obviously a public safety threat. That's why they lock them up. And ICE can't get access to the jail to talk to the person, even though he's in the country illegally. And again, remove them from the community and from the country so he can't reoffend. And the second thing this does, it allows more resources for the local community. I've been contacted by 2 separate pastors with the Black community who are outraged that they're paying millions of dollars to house illegal aliens, giving them 3 square meals a day, giving them medical attention, when the Black community feels like they've been left behind because they don't get those kind of benefits from the city.
Well, they spent $40 million a month on illegals in Chicago. That's a lot of money.
And meanwhile, there's homeless vets on the streets of Chicago that they're not getting any help.
That don't work. The migrant caravan, 7,000 strong, close to the southern border. Spell it out for us. What happens when they arrive?
Catch and release. The secretary.
Our borders are porous. Now, why does this matter in the Israeli-Hamas conflict? It's adding to the probability that there are sleeper cells or certain material coming over the border that will lead to some sort of pseudo 9/11 event that ushers in more national security provisions, strengthen the national security state, which I'm totally against. I think we should dismantle the national security state. But the thing is that because of democratic policies, we have a porous border, and because we have porous border, then we are having our country moving into an elevated risk where a pseudo 9/11 may take place. All right. I don't think it'd be as big, but if you have a few terrorist activities at a smaller level, coordinated, taking place on the same day or over a very short amount of time, there's going to be national security state provisions that usher in more of the Bio-Patriot Act. And I've talked about the Bio-Patriot Act, and all the different pillars of it. The economic pillar, which is the digital currency, the metadata and tracking and social scoring, the forced biological inoculations for potential war and potential attack. And so there's a lot that needs to be considered here. A lot of people don't understand that the United States government, I think, wanted to move towards a civilian population that acts or how should I use the word? I should use the word instead of acts. It should comply, right? The national security state is looking for a complying population in the United States, where annually there are updates for their inoculations for war, either to be ready for an offense or be ready for a defense. On top of it, that would be a gigantic boom for the pharmaceutical companies, right? But not only that, then you're starting to move into being able to cull the herd if you need to. But there's a lot of problems with this whole BioPatriot Act and where we're going with this national security state. And we let it happen because
Right.
of the forced border.
Catch and release. The Secretary Mark that's his policy. They'll be called, they'll be processed, they'll be flown to the city of their choice at taxpayer expense to get work authorization while they fight their case. There's no consequence to crossing the border illegally. Under the Trump administration, they're either detained or removed. There was no catch and release. And as long as they keep catching and releasing, they're going to keep coming. There's no downside. They're going to keep coming to the greatest nation on earth, knowing they're going to take advantage of the lax border policies.
They can go anywhere they like. Say,
Yeah.
I want to go to Seattle. I want to go to New York.
Exactly. They get to choose where they go, and we're going to fly them there on taxpayer dime. Then we're going to put them in a hotel here in New York City. They'll get 3 squares a day. They'll get medical attention. They'll get transportation. They'll even get help, money from the city of New York to fight their immigration case. They'll get money to fight the government on the deportation proceedings.
I've got to move on from this because my head's exploding. But look, the last one. Republic.
He's right, because what's happening with the nonprofits in New York, they get federal funds and state funds and even city funds, but primarily federal funds for processing these quote illegal immigration cases. And these nonprofits, UJA is one of them, Catholic Charities another. That's how I know. I've done the budget for the department within Catholic Charities on what exactly he's talking about. I've seen it firsthand. And what happens is a large sum of money comes through, and it's been shepherded by Schumer, Senator Schumer, to the nonprofits in New York. And what happens is that a whole slew of lawyers are paid to process these cases. And some of them, a lot of them get to stay. Most of them get to stay. Some of them don't. But there is an industry of the federal government paying the nonprofits to process these types of people, and it's wrong. It's just wrong. These are not asylum cases. These are just porous border, and they're just taking advantage of it. At what point do you say that you should make your own country better instead of coming to America, right? And not every single country that they're coming from is in a war-torn situation where they're a refugee. Majority of these people are not refugees. And there's the sleeper cell thing that's happening too. There's an awful lot of people that are coming over the border that aren't even getting processed. They're flying underneath the radar.
But the last one. Republicans have linked border funding with more aid for Ukraine.
See, there's Chuck
and
Schumer
for
right there.
Israel. Do you think it's good to lump them all together?
Absolutely. Whatever it gets to get the Democrats to take care of the border situation. They want Ukraine funding. They're more concerned about the border of Ukraine than they are about the border here, our southern border, which is a huge national security crisis. We don't know who's coming across the border. We know we got 1.7 million gotaways. We know they've arrested 284 people on terrorist watch list. How many of that 1.7 comes from a country sponsored terror? So if this forces Democrats to come to the table, then I'm all for it. And this is not a money issue. It's not a funding issue. This is a policy issue. What the Republicans in the House want is a policy change, because this is a policy problem, not a funding
But
issue.
the Democrats are taking an enormous political risk. If there is a terrorist incident in the United States linked to a border crosser, an illegal border crosser, and they open the border, the political consequences for the Democrats are extraordinary. They're taking huge risks.
I've been screaming about this 2 years. The biggest concern I have on the southern border is the national security crisis. Why did 1.7 million people choose not to take advantage of the giveaway program? Turn yourself in, get released, get phone, the city of your choice, get work authorization, and get money to fight your case. Why did 1.7 million people pay more to get away? Because they don't want to be vetted, they don't want to be fingerprinted. This should scare the hell out of every American.
See, what a situation. Tom Homan,
He's right.
just right.
He's absolutely right.
You got it?
So when I say that the Israel, you got a lot of people in America that's saying, I want to be an isolationist. Well, you know what? You can't be an isolationist because the border's porous and you got a big problem coming. All right, next. All right, this one is the Blackhawk helicopter crash. I think there is the front story and there's probably a backstory. All right, there was some training operation during a refueling, special forces. We probably have activities already going on, in the region, right? Probably in Syria. We know of one case, supposedly, that was a special force casualty on the first, night or the second night during the movement into Gaza with the IDF. So they're probably, doing some stuff in Lebanon and in Syria, maybe even Iraq. We'll see. I don't know. But the story is that they were doing a training refueling thing with the helicopter, and then on the same night, or within a 12-15 hour period, we strike Syria. I suspect there's something more to the story, but this is what at least is on the surface.
Had 46 attacks on our men and women in uniform. So let's take a look. You're talking about 2,500 here in Iraq and about 900 here. And they basically sit there and duck and cover. You have a lot of guys with some head injuries from the concussion of the strikes and from the missile defense knocking these strikes out of the air. But if you look at these strikes, look at this. Some 14 hits in Iraq, another 5.
Again, you come to DrPaulCottrell's show, right? PNN, and you learn something. But, in my medical neuro class, we had to do a presentation, and for me, I did a tumor removal, a pituitary tumor removal, just above the entrance point. Was just above the eye. So you make an incision. You break the bone, the frontal bone here, right? And then you go in towards the tumor. Now there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's also a way to go this way. There's nasal, go through the nose. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, right? But this particular presentation that I did was just over the eye. And we had a lot of military. You'd be surprised in how many ex-military or reservists go to Harvard. All right, there's a lot there. I was surprised. You wouldn't think that would be the case, but there are quite a few people that are ex-military or reservists. And we had an ex-military individual doing the presentation, and their presentation was actually on concussions, military concussions, but it wasn't through this. See, they're talking about you're sitting in the base and a rocket comes by and there's a concussion. You're not hit physically, but you're feeling the blast. And it can do damage to the brain, because there's some space between the skull and the brain, the meninges kind of holds the brain tight to the skull, but the brain can move around, right? There's a little bit of play. So if there is some sort of shock wave, the brain will ricochet onto the walls of the skull and cause some damage. Well, the research that they were presenting showed concussions based on shooting rocket launchers, RPG type stuff, right? And they found out that you can't shoot certain types of munition, or even ones that fire cannons and stuff. You can't fire munitions on, up to a certain number of times per day. Or if you went beyond that, it would actually increase your chances of concussion and permanent, some sort of permanent damage to the brain. So a lot of people think, okay, I'm just going to shoot my RPG, 100 times, or shoot that cannon 1,000 times. And the reality is that those shock waves, even from your own munition release, is causing brain injury. And so what they, so that what they're doing research on how many times can a soldier actually shoot? How many times can a soldier actually shoot a munition for that day? And then they have to, no more. I don't know what the number is. Let's just say 6 or 10, right? And then no more for that day. And then the next day, 6 or 10, or they'll have, when they do these trainings, a lot of times they may want to space it out. What they're finding out is they want to like shoot 10 and then maybe 2 day off. And this is all training. Obviously in a war situation, you got to shoot as many as you can to kill the enemy. But the reality is that the training to releasing these munitions, certain types of munitions, not all types of munitions, but I would think that tankers would also have a problem. They're shooting in the Abram tank. That just through the training you can get these concussions. A lot of people aren't thinking that. So these special forces that are always like shooting, really important things, and and blah blah blah, they're developing concussions and potentially brain injuries. I don't think a lot of people are thinking that. Now, the point I'm making here is that through that research that's going on by the military, we produce more concussions through training than anything that is happening with rockets being shot. Those people that are in those bases, the 2,500 and 2,500 in Iraq, and I think it was 900 in Syria, they probably already have brain injury from just munition release training. Another perspective that you don't hear anywhere else.
In Iraq, another 5 here in Iraq. You have the one here, another 5 here in Iraq. But we've chosen, I don't know if it's a deal with Baghdad or not to hit back any place but Syria. The most substantial strikes are the last 2 strikes. 6 or 7 people died. We were able to surveil this for a while. First, it was here. Just an empty facility. They say full of weapons. They did notice here secondary explosions, which shows they got a weapons depot and they got some militia members. But the question is, after we hit back for a second time last Thursday, we got hit back with 4 more attacks. And on Sunday, we hit back twice. The question is, has Iran gotten the message yet? More than likely, the answer is not. We bring more assets in, we show them the firepower we have, and the attacks continue. They say it is just the resistance militia that have combined to go against outside sources. We went out of our way to say this has nothing to do with Israel and Hamas's attack and Israel's reprisals. I have news for you. It has everything to do with Israel. There was also a situation. Here when you look at the fact that we were in Baghdad and we have this meeting last week with the Secretary of State. We have 14 hits on our biggest base, and we have yet to answer for that. Missile defense, guys, is just not going to be the only answer. We have to show a toughness and a rigor, and we have to stop qualifying every attack with, we don't want a war. We know we don't want a war. We never wanted a war. Israel didn't want a war. Our enemies have a say in this, and I think strength is the only thing we have back. Hopefully this will send a more substantial message because they seem to love the distraction of America hitting.
But they've attacked us all. Three?
Yeah, three times this last time. This time is 2 separate strikes. This is the first time there's been casualties that we know of.
All right. On this Monday morning, let's bring in retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Darren Dowd. He was a Blackhawk helicopter pilot and battalion commander in the Mideast. Easy for me to say. He joins us right now. Colonel, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Pleasure to see you.
It's great to have you. It sounds like this place was apparently a training camp and a safe house that they hit overnight our time. It was apparently a headquarters for some of these Iranian-aligned groups. They had to know we were coming, didn't they?
Oh, of course. And they'll continue to take these odds all day long. It's already been mentioned down here. You know, they've hit us nearly 50 times, and we've retaliated 3 times, once against an empty camp. So this is the message that Iran is hearing, is for them to keep going.
You know, Lieutenant Colonel, when we talk about the brain injuries, these TBIs that our soldiers are getting, I mean,
like I keep on saying, the only way this is going to end is us destroying Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. But you have a lot of people out there that want to be isolationists, that think that this is not going to come home. But, you know, the thing is that we already have a porous border, and I'm sure we have sleeper cells.
TBIs that our soldiers are getting, I mean, we're just handing them out like they're cookies right now, as if it's not going to have some sort of impact. But my fear is that this is going to escalate to the death of our soldiers. What should be the response from the Biden administration right now?
Yeah, right now the response needs to be basically that if wherever these attacks come from, we need to turn it into a parking lot. The message that has to be that we are actually responding from a position of strength, and that Iran's going to pay a heavy price, much heavier price than they anticipated for anything they do against us. The message that needs to be heard again is strength. That's all they know in this region.
What the United States is doing as a political ploy for a UN resolution is to just pile up the number of attacks that are happening in on our bases, you know, through proxies of Iran, and then have a Security Council meeting to create resolutions against Iran to justify further U.S. involvement in the region, especially against Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. So, but the thing is that this is one of those international policy wonks trying to navigate through this problem. And I think that just all out destruction of Iran is the best policy, because it's going to get worse. Now, a lot of people disagree with me. There are a lot of people that agree with me. The bottom line is that we've been kicking the can down the road too long, and it's time to destroy.
That's all they know in this region really is force, and we have to speak it better than them.
Yeah, sir, we wanted to get your reaction to this because you're a retired U.S. Army Blackhawk helicopter pilot, and one of our pilots, or 5 of our men, went down in this helicopter crash. I assume they're men during this training exercise in the Mediterranean Sea on Friday. They're saying that the helicopter suffered a mishap and crashed during a routine air refueling mission. It was an MH-60 Blackhawk helicopter and on board U.S. Army Special Operations Forces. Your reaction, tell us what you think might have happened.
Yeah, the possibilities here are almost endless. There's no such thing as a routine mid-air refueling mission using a Blackhawk helicopter. These are some challenging environments, especially at night. You don't know what the winds are. You don't know the circumstance, and the investigation into this is going to take some time. So we need to give them that time to figure out what the real facts are. I don't like the idea of calling things like this, though, just routine. And the word mishap means.
Or was it just a cover story?
And the word mishap means really we don't know yet. And that's an accurate statement, and it's best just to let them go through the investigation process. Sometimes it will take months, and so I'll be curious to see what those results are as well. But in the meantime, of course, we need to make sure that we mourn for the loss and we recognize the service of those who died.
If I can just pivot a little bit, last week it became word that we have special ops on the ground, it seems, helping to get our hostages out of Gaza. How do we approach that mission, knowing the casualties not only cost our men and women their lives, but it'll be a disaster diplomatically around the world? What do you think our guys are doing? How do they work with the idea?
The hostages should not be a determining factor in how to execute the war in the Middle East. Get the job done, because by getting the job done, more people will be saved in the long run. More casualties will happen if you try to save the hostages and de-escalate the situation, kick the can down the road, and then all of a sudden you have unconventional means that have been procured by the terrorists and by Iran.
How do they work with the IDF?
Well, first of all, we know they went there under an advisory assignment, so they're helping the IDF with the process of how to do this, intelligence and various things as well. The IDF is extremely well trained and capable of handling this mission. We just need to be there to back up our ally and help them hopefully successfully recover as many hostages as possible. Direct engagement, and whether they're on the ground in Gaza, assisting them, that wouldn't surprise me, but I think it's one of those things that if it is happening, that we would never really talk about, of course, on the air, but I hope they are there in some ways, at least in that advisory capacity, and being very effective with them. We can get these hostages recovered.
One of the hostages is a 3-year-old boy whose parents were killed. How do you process that?
But yeah, that's a hard one. Kids don't always understand what really truly happens, and you just have to get around those children and hold them close, and hopefully you can just do your best.
Real quickly, Lieutenant Colonel, explain to our audience, you know, our door kickers, our special forces have been working with IDF for years. They train them with the capabilities, hostage rescue. They've been doing that for a while. So explain the relationship there. And they've kind of been on the ground for a while now.
Yeah, one of the things about our special forces is that their primary mission really is to educate and train other nations' forces in order to make them better. Our special forces are often not directly engaged because they want to make sure that the host nation's special forces and other people that they train are ready to do the job themselves. So that's the relationship the special forces has around the world, regardless of the military and what nation they come from. And these Israeli Defense Forces, though, are one of those that are uniquely talented and gifted in this region. And I would trust them with these missions inherently.
Yeah, some of the best in HR and hostage rescue. Hopefully they can get our people back. Lieutenant Colonel, thanks so much for joining the program this morning.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I wonder what the chances are, because you
Don't worry about the hostages. Assume that they're dead. Assume you won't get them alive. If you can get them alive, great. It's icing on the cake. Get the job done. More than that, thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands, are going to get killed later down the road by worrying about hostages and de-escalating this. Proof in the pudding, 50 years of kicking the can down the road. And it's only gotten worse. Something's weird though about the Blackhawk helicopter refueling training mission. I don't believe it was a training mission. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the products such as structural nano silver drops. I have honey and lemon in 100 count. Very tasty, especially during the cold season like we're in right now. We're in the cold season until March. I have also blueberry drops, also in 100 count. Structural nano silver lozenges, and this is the green apple, 20 count, because they're larger. And then I also have them in sweet menthol, 20 count. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get a couple of these structural nano silver lozenges and drops. It'll soothe your throat, neutralize pathogens, and help you get through the day if you're not feeling well, you know, because of a cold or whatever else that is released out there.
Are because I think special ops. I think of all the movies that we've watched. Yeah. They're going to go in and rescue.
The problem right now is that a lot of our special ops, they operate on secrecy as well as a surprise, and that's gone now. And so that's going to be the hard part. But the IDF guys have been doing this. They've been doing this for a while. They're some of the best in the world at this. I have full confidence that they can handle this mission. I think our guys should continue to advise and support them, give them the resources that they need. But I have full confidence, and I've trained with some of these guys before. They know what they're doing. They're some of the best at it.
But you're right, the element of surprise is gone.
We have too many special forces. We have too many Navy SEALs. We need to up the ante, mechanized warfare, seek and destroy, instead of the surgical bullshit that doesn't work. All right, next. Several Iranian-linked fighters dead after U.S. issues retaliatory strike in Syria. Now, you got to remember, this helicopter training mission seemed to coincide with this strike.
We're told at least 6 Iranian fighters are dead after the U.S. strikes 2 targets in eastern Syria overnight. One was a training site that doubled as a logistics and weapons storage facility.
Doesn't stop. We're also seeing new video of the moment Israel's Arrow interceptor successfully shot down a rocket launch from Iranian-backed fighters in Yemen on October.
Hold on. Speaker problems. I'll tell you, once Apple updated their software, a lot of things don't work anymore. And here's another diatribe from DrPaulCottrell. You know, there's an awful lot of fucking liberals that work at Apple, and they can't get the job done. Here again, you know, a guy like Steve Jobs, all right, that was very, you know, forceful on quality, dies and hands over the whole company to Tim Cook, who, you know, is a homosexual. And you know what? You know, now the whole company is just a bunch of libtards, and they can't even get the damn software right. All right, so I'm gonna have to reboot for some reason on this. I'm gonna have to reboot it. I don't know why the speaker isn't working. It's just like, this is classic Apple. You know, bunch of retards running the show. All right, okay, now it's working. Yeah, we got rockets.
We are told at least 6 Iranian fighters are dead.
All right, here we go. Restarting. But seriously, Apple is run by a bunch of libtards. You know, they created that UFO headquarters, right? The infinite circle, the loop, and inside was supposed to be like a garden, with trees, supposedly apple trees. I don't know if that's true or not. But then what they did was they put in like blaze centers with LBGTQ play centers in the center of this little park. Just so stupid. Apple is just a bunch of amazing.
At least 6 Iranian fighters are dead after the U.S. strikes 2 targets in eastern Syria overnight. One was a training site that doubled as a logistics and weapons storage facility. The other, a safe house. You're watching Fox and Friends First here on a Monday morning. I'm Todd Pyros.
And I'm Carly Shimkus. These precision airstrikes were in retaliation for the 48 attacks on our troops in Iraq and Syria since October 17th. And our defense secretary says more could come if the violence doesn't stop.
We're also seeing new video of the moment Israel's Arrow interceptor successfully shot down a rocket launched from Iranian-backed fighters in Yemen on October 31st. Let's look at that video. It is still a very active war scene over in Gaza and Israel today.
That's right. Trey Yanks is reporting live on the ground in southern Israel for us this morning. Hi, Trey.
Hey, Todd, Carly, good morning. It is day 38 of the war between Israel and Hamas. Overnight, the Israelis ramped up their airstrikes against the northern and central part of Gaza. Into today, they're still striking the northern part of the strip. You can see here, as my cameraman pushes in, some of that black smoke rising from the Gaza skyline. The Israelis working to support those infantry troops that are pushing deeper into Gaza. The Palestinians reported those new airstrikes in the second largest city of Khan Yunis overnight. On the ground, we do understand that the Israelis have the Al-Shifa hospital surrounded. They say they are still trying to get people to evacuate from the eastern side of that hospital. But it comes as they are trying to take more territory across Gaza. The Israelis say they now control the Gaza port with the help of their Navy. And the death toll among Israeli forces rising to 44 soldiers since the ground operation began. I do want to draw your attention, though, to northern Israel along the border with Lebanon, where fighting is intensifying. The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah getting more directly involved in this fight. They are trying to see just how far they can go, pushing their luck with the Israelis, according to officials that we've talked to, because they are using anti-tank guided missiles. They are also trying to fire mortars into northern Israel. And this has led to more than 24 injuries over the past 2 days between the soldiers and the civilians in the northern part of Israel. A very active scene on the southern front and on the northern front as the fighting continues between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah. Todd, Carly.
Trey Yanks live for us this morning. Trey, thank you for starting us off. Let's bring in Fox News contributor and former CIA station chief, Dan Hoffman. Dan, the breaking news, that strike from the good guys against the bad guys, the United States troops against Iran proxies. Is this strike going to be the one that finally deters Iran, or Dan, is it too little too late still?
Well, I think that's certainly a question that President Biden's national security advisors will be asking the intelligence community and our Department of Defense. I think the Biden administration's been very careful about walking up that escalation.
Dan Hoffman, former CIA station chief. Yeah. Part of the national security state that helped usher in the Patriot Act and the Bio-Patriot Act. Let's not forget, going all the way back to the 50s and how the CIA started all this bullshit with Iran. And now our generation has to clean up the mess. DrPaulCottrell, do you think it's too little too late? Not enough action, retaliation in the Middle East with what's going on with the proxies of Iran? Of course. We need to absolutely destroy Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran and hit them hard and decapitate the Ayatollah. No, let's just do surgical strikes and do refueling missions that blow up in the air.
Walking up that escalation ladder step by step, and these latest strikes, which reportedly killed, as you said, 6 Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps militants. So
the reason why I say the things the way I say it, if you couple what this crisis is, even though they seem different, and the last crisis that we went through, all right, is a level of incompetence of our leaders and quote experts that can't get the job done.
Guard Corps militants, so not Guard Corps themselves, but proxy militants associated with them. That's another step. I don't think it will be enough to deter Iran. I think Iran sees great value in stretching U.S. forces. Look, we've deployed 2 carrier groups, Patriot missiles, and aircraft to the region, and that's exactly what Iran wants, as well as their allies, Russia and China.
Yeah, and over the weekend, Dan, Iran's president visited Saudi Arabia for the first time in over a decade for this summit where Arab and Muslim leaders openly condemned Israel's war in the Gaza Strip. What do you think about that? And also at this summit, there was open criticism for Arab nations to have normalized relations with Israel. So is there any hope left that Saudi Arabia will one day normalize relations with Israel?
Well, I think there's 2 wars going on simultaneously. One is the kinetic war you've been reporting on so well, Trey, including Trey this morning from Gaza. The other one is the information war, and we're not winning that one. Hamas is deliberately using their brethren as human shields to create a humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip. And Iran knows that they can drive a wedge.
This feed down here is Al Jazeera. Pre-war unemployment rate, for the Palestinians, 46%. Didn't seem like Hamas and the Palestinian government was really helping its people. Pre-war, 63% of the Palestinians live below the poverty line. But you have Al Jazeera playing the pre-war statistics, and it's going to get worse in during the war and post-war, at least short-term post-war. But they're not focusing on, the Israelis are actually trying to get the babies out of the hospital so they can stabilize them because they don't have enough supplies and energy. No. Anything that may be positive in the light of the Israelis can't be said on Al Jazeera. But let's rehash pre-war statistics.
Iran knows that they can drive a wedge between pro-Palestinian populations in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the rulers of those nations. And Iran, as you rightly point out, particularly focused on Saudi Arabia. They want to ensure that there is no reconciliation between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And this is their opportunity to try to pressure the government of Saudi Arabia to hold off on what would have been a great diplomatic achievement on top of the Abraham Accords.
Focusing on the kinetic for a moment, these were precision strikes. And that makes me beg the question, look, we got some of the best surveillance technology in the world, if not the best. We have individuals like yourself, the highest level of our intel apparatus that knows where the bad guys are. Keep using that phrase, bad guys. So why don't we do more of these surgical strikes? They basically keep our men and women out of combat, but accomplish many of the same goals. Dan, why don't we do more of this?
Well, I think we're doing it. Look, the Iranians are pretty good with their proxy militants at moving from place to place. They construct these safe houses that they use for a mobile.
Wrong answer. Wrong answer, CIA chief. Hit Iran. Forget about the proxies. Get to the root cause. Didn't I say in the last crisis, the only way that you can solve the problem is get to the root cause? And everyone was saying, I don't want to take this. I don't want the mandate of blah, blah, blah. What's the root cause? A runaway national security state developing things they shouldn't be developing. Swords and shields in biologics. I'm tired of stupid people.
For a mobile headquarters for some period of time, and then they'll move on from there. I think we're still waiting for the battle damage assessment for these latest strikes. But again, I think what the Biden administration does and what administrations have done before them is frankly not enough to deter Iran. I can remember when I was serving in Iraq over a decade ago, and we were subjected to daily strikes from Iranian proxy militias there, and we never did enough to stop them. The Iranians use these proxy militias.
Classic example of what I've been saying. For the last 50 freaking years, we've been kicking the can down the road. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. It's going to go kinetic with unconventionals.
Use these proxy militias, and it's a challenge for us to devote our intelligence resources to find and fix and then finish those locations.
Yeah, and there's also this Wall Street Journal op-ed titled "Biden Keeps the Billions Flowing to Iran," and it points out Iran exported nearly 1.4 million barrels of oil per day last month, which is up 80% from when Trump had the maximum pressure strategy on Iran. So they say that Iran has made an additional $32 to $35 billion since Joe Biden took office. So there are these military efforts. They also say follow the money, and there's a lot of money still flowing to Iran because of this oil.
Right,
and the Democratic Party is on the take. There are intermediary companies and individuals that are getting kickbacks. It's also the reason why the Ukraine war never ends. I'll tell you, America needs one gigantic asteroid to hit it because we're just a bunch of dumbasses.
Right, and that's the larger strategic issue at play here. Iran is now a nuclear threshold state, and yeah, the oil is flowing, so that might keep oil prices down, and maybe the Biden administration wants that, but it adds money to Iran's coffers, and they're allowed to spend, to divert that money to support these proxy terrorists like Hezbollah and the Houthis, as well as their militants in Iraq and in Syria. And at this time in particular, that is causing us grave concern, and you're absolutely right to highlight that.
Yeah. Well, it's not just Iran. Iran's partner is Russia and China as well, and President Biden is going to be meeting with Xi Jinping later this week in San Francisco, so we're definitely going to be watching that and see what comes out of that meeting as well. Dan, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
All
right, so let's play the next video. All right, this is Sky News Australia, which I think is, a good show to watch once in a while. Israeli Defense Force continuously calling for citizens of Gaza to move south. Here we go. This was 4 hours ago.
Lieutenant Colonel Amnon Shefler of the Israel Defense Forces. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for your time. How many people do you guess are still at the Shifa Hospital?
Andrew, thank you for having us. We assess that there are still people inside, and as you mentioned, we are doing everything for weeks, calling them and all the Gazan citizens to leave to the south. We have allowed 2 corridors in order to do that. We're taking tactical pauses in order to do that, and we're continuously calling and text messaging and telling everyone to please move to the south, which is a safer area.
Now, what assets does Hamas have in this hospital that you know of, and how do you know it?
We have
Al Jazeera, more than 40% of Gaza's schools damaged, and 625,000 students have no access to education. But they don't tell you on Al Jazeera that they actually embed Hamas next to schools.
We have very strong evidence, intel, and also now in the ground. And we have shared this also with our partners around the world that have also affirmed this. Hamas is using these hospitals as their headquarters. They are hiding underneath weaponry, similarly like they're doing in schools, under kindergartens, and in many civilian areas, because they deliberately use those spaces, knowing that we follow our values and the rule of armed conflict, and refrain from striking those areas whenever that is possible. But as again you mentioned, and we have shown many times, Hamas is continuously using these to launch more attacks on Israeli civilians. We have now getting close to 10,000 rockets that have been fired at Israelis, and much of them come from within the hospitals where they are controlled and commanded. And that is why we need to get to them eventually. But we're trying to do that in the safest way for the civilians in Gaza.
Now, Hamas health officials are saying there's no power at Shifa Hospital and babies are dying. They've all been taken off incubators, they say. Although the photos, and I'm not going to show them on the air, it's a bit distressing. The photos have seen the lights are still on for the photographer at least. So there does seem to be some power, but nobody wants to see babies die. So what does Israel do?
Nobody wants to see babies die on our side and on the civilized world. Sadly, Hamas does. That is why they have murdered babies in Israel, and that is why they wish to continue doing that. Because we believe that every life is sanctuary, and we need to do everything in order to do that. We have offered for the evacuation of the babies in many different ways, and we're continuously doing that. Sadly, the Hamas is not allowing that, as it did not allow the evacuation of other civilians from the area. Yesterday, we even took the risk of our soldiers bringing fuel to the hospital in order to continue in operating it in the best possible way for these babies and others to be as safe as possible. And so far, they're not taking that fuel. So we're doing everything in order to help those babies and others in need to be safe.
Now, hostages, there was talk of Hamas letting a few more go, half of them American hostages, dual citizens. Where are those talks up to?
So we're in day 38 with 239 hostages and dozens more that are still unaccounted for. And we're working in any way that we can in order to bring them back home safely, be it Americans or any other nationality. This is our main mission, including the mission to dismantle Hamas.
But I take it those talks have broken down. It seemed that Hamas was stringing it out, hoping to buy some pressure for a ceasefire. There's been no progress, I take it then.
We're following through on all different routes. The military is, of course, doing its work on the ground and from the air and the sea. And the diplomats are doing everything that they can in order for us to bring home these civilians, that we must, again, remember that they haven't been visited by Red Cross or anyone else. And that is what they should be, treated properly in the best way and released safely home now.
Lieutenant Colonel Amnon Scheffler, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Must be unbelievable days you're putting in there. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Does old Joey look chump?
All right, next video. This is Sky News. Racist taunt after racist taunt. Anti-Semitic protesters march for peace.
Around 150 demonstrators were detained, 9 police officers injured. Some officers were injured preventing a violent crowd getting to the cenotaph while a remembrance service took place. Very disgusting stuff, isn't it? Joining me on the ground is Tom Slater, editor for Spiked Online and a contributor to the UK's Spectator magazine. Tom, thank you for your time. I was in London a couple of weeks ago. I saw a very large rally, 100,000 or so in and around Piccadilly, but 300,000 I was shocked you had them there again on this Remembrance Day weekend. I thought they would have stayed away in deference to the historical and respectful tone of the weekend, but not the case. How have British people responded to this?
I think British people are sickened by what they're seeing, because what we're witnessing here really is the birth or the explosion of an anti-Semitic street protest movement. That's essentially what this is. We shouldn't mince words about it. I mean, what we saw on Saturday at this supposed...
It's not just anti-Semitic. It's going to be anti-Western culture. It's going to be anti-Christian. It's going to be anti-UK. It's going to be anti-US. It's going to be anti-German. I'm telling you, it's the snake that's going to eat itself. And it's not just anti-Israeli, anti-Jew.
On Saturday at this supposed March for Peace was people repeating Arabic war slogans about the slaughter of Jews in the 7th century. There's video footage of people saying "kill all the Jews" quite openly. There's placards in which the Star of David is presented with a swastika in the heart of it, and people suggesting that Gaza is paired with Auschwitz. Again, racist taunt after racist taunt. And even if you want to dismiss that as a few bad apples, as a lot of people, particularly on the British left, have tried to do, the organisers of this march, the Daily Telegraph did an investigation the other week. Half of the groups who are behind organising these marches have links to Hamas, and not even kind of 6 degrees of separation. We're talking about one of the groups in particular was founded by a former Hamas chief who for some reason now lives in London. So we need to take this very, very seriously. I think, well, not since the black shirts have we seen such a sustained intimidatory presence on Britain's streets in menacing the Jewish community. And what sickens me most is that there are still many people...
We're all being judged here. Get on the right side, or you're going to get fucked.
Sickens me most is that there are still many people in positions of influence who don't seem to be taking it that seriously at all.
No, and I do not want to be accused of downplaying anti-Semitism, but I have to say there's an anti-Christian element now creeping into a lot of these protests. So if you think you're not Jewish and it doesn't bother you, or something you shouldn't have to worry about, I tell you do, because the saying goes, doesn't it? They came for me, and then they will come for you. Home Secretary Suella Braverman, she really went after the police. She said they play favourites when it comes to protesters. She made the point about COVID. We saw that here. The Black Lives Matter protesters, well, they were fine, but anyone else who was out there and not doing what they should have been during lockdown, they were taken to task by the police. There's been calls for her to resign, but also a lot of Brits saying she needs to keep speaking out. Give us the take, or your take, on the sort of the issue with British police.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that Suella Braverman is absolutely right to suggest that the police have remarkable double standards where protests and free speech are concerned. During lockdown, she made this example herself. You had anti-lockdown protesters who had their collars felt, were fined, were arrested. Within weeks, we had the Black Lives Matter protests in which they got a much softer hand, shall we say, and even were greeted by some police officers who decided to take the knee. In recent days, there's been a scandal in this country over a gender-critical woman who's been interviewed by the police because she supposedly misgendered someone on the internet. Meanwhile, you've got anti-Semitic slogans being chanted for seeming impunity on Britain's streets.
See what I'm talking about? Taking the knee, misgendering speech, and all this crap. I'm telling you, God is looking at this. It's going, you're just Sodom and Gomorrah, and you're gonna get cleansed. You're gonna get punished. There's gonna be a retribution. The ultra liberal has brought down a curse on everybody because even the conservatives didn't push back hard enough to prevent their policies from being enshrined in the laws of different countries, such as abortion. Killing the baby in the womb is written in the Constitution in Ohio. And you think that that's going to be a positive outlook coming from on high? No. The Dow is down 23 points and S&P 500 down 17 points. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Impunity on Britain's streets. So on that question, I think it's completely unassailable. And to be honest, the response from many people suggesting that she's undermining the police and so on, these are rightful criticisms. I understand that the point that she is the Home Secretary, she's in a position to do things about this. She shouldn't be carrying on just like a pundit carping from the sidelines. I get that criticism. But to suggest that it was illegitimate of her to raise these concerns, that these things don't exist, I think is ridiculous. And I've been very dismayed by the way in which this discussion of these marches has just become effectively a kind of rage against Suella Braverman, rather than talking about the actual issues involved. But naturally, it's all just become using her as a kind of punch bag rather than dealing with the proper issues that we need to confront in this issue.
Tom, I'm just about out of time, but just quickly, I mean, the commentary that I've listened to over the last 48 hours says that these protests are going to continue every single weekend. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like for the foreseeable future, they're showing no signs of abating. It's the biggest one that we've seen so far. And I think ordinary people really need to take this very, very seriously. I don't want to see a crackdown. I don't think you can fight this kind of hatred with censorship, but I think everyone does need to stand up against these protests because of the open bigotry on display, because of how much British Jews are being menaced at this point, and also because of a point that you made, which is that anti-Semitism is a particularly deranging form of racism. When a society has such open expressions of it, you know you're going down a particularly dark path. So I would just urge everyone with conscience, essentially, to oppose what is going on, because history won't be kind to those people who don't.
Tom Slater, thank you. I'll make the point, though, in France, too, over the weekend, 100,000 marched against anti-Semitism. So that gives me some hope. If I think Emmanuel Macron is on the wrong tram with the idea of a ceasefire.
Next. World Health Organization says Gaza's main hospital no longer functioning. BBC.
Concern about the dire state of hospitals in Gaza. This map shows hospitals in the Gaza Strip. The UN says 20 out of 36 are no longer working. The biggest, Al-Shifa, is not functioning at all, according to the World Health Organization. Al-Shifa's head of surgery has told the BBC that a third premature newborn baby has died because of a lack of power. There are reports that Gaza's second biggest hospital, Al-Quds, has run out of fuel. It's now 5 weeks since Hamas designated.
It would be interesting to know for that it was premature, right? Let me make sure I heard that right.
Because of a lack of power. There are reports that Gaza's second biggest hospital, the health organization, Al-Shifa's head of surgery, has told the BBC that a third premature newborn baby has died because of a lack of power. There are reports that Gaza's second biggest hospital.
I'd like to know what age the premature baby was, because the earlier, the earlier the premature relative to the development of the child, the less chance of even survival, even if you did have power. I mean, that's an important data point.
That Gaza's second biggest hospital, Al-Quds, has run out of fuel. It's now 5 weeks since Hamas designated a terror organization by the UK government, killed more than 1,200 people in Israel, and took more than 200 hostage. Since then, Hamas officials say well over 11,000 people have been killed in Israeli attacks on Gaza. Well, let's go live to Jerusalem now and speak to our correspondent, Tom Bateman. Good morning, Tom. Another week begins. Just talk us through what's been happening overnight.
Well, what we have is this really desperate situation at Al-Shifa Hospital. You were hearing about the World Health Organization talking about a perilous and dire situation, and that is because of the fact that around the hospital now there is very fierce fighting. They're talking about intense bombardment and armed clashes, and so within the hospital, on top of what has been, a very, very an extreme.
Have you noticed the biasness of the BBC?
Be very an extremely difficult humanitarian situation for weeks now. It is effectively completely closed, apart from what the Israelis say are safe evacuation routes out. Now, Palestinians say that it is simply not safe. There are dead bodies lining the route that people have been shot at and people killed when they have tried to leave. So it's extremely perilous. And in the middle of all this huge crisis with 36 now premature babies taken out of the neonatal intensive care unit because it stopped functioning because of the loss of power, now being kept in a cardiac surgery room without the right equipment. They're not in incubators. They can't be kept properly warm. They have desperate needs. And the doctor there, Dr. Marwan Abu Sada, fears those babies will die unless either the hospital gets fuel to power incubators or there is a safe evacuation for those babies, but it takes very specialized medical equipment.
This is 4 hours ago.
Okay,
And the Israelis, this is 4 hours ago on BBC, and the Israelis stated that they were going to evacuate those children. Not one damn thing has been mentioned about that by the Israelis. They didn't say evacuation by the Israelis, you know, either IDF or whatever. Bias.
Hence the call on the part of the WHO for action on this. In the meantime, there's been conflicting reports coming through overnight about the hostages. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking to the US network NBC, saying that a deal is possible, could come about, and yet we're getting reports from Reuters, via Reuters, Hamas saying no, they've stopped talking because of the attacks on Al-Shifa.
Well, first of all, when it comes to the hostages, we have had for weeks speculation, the sense that perhaps a deal to release a large number of hostages in exchange for a ceasefire and possibly also the release of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. Those kinds of discussions have been going on for a long time, and at various points, people have said, including leading officials, that something could be close, and then it hasn't come to fruition. So it's hard to read too much into either what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying or these denials by Hamas. I mean, my sense, talking to somebody over the last week who's familiar with the negotiations, is that the process is very intense. It is certainly happening. One of the big problems is actually around communication, because you have Qatar, which hosts the political offices of Hamas, acting as mediators. But certainly the Israeli media, it's being suggested it can take anything up to 2 days for messages from the Israelis and responses to come back from Hamas. So it's clearly very, very difficult, but it seems that possibility does remain on the horizon of a possible release and potentially a large number. But beyond knowing that the discussions, it seems, have been continuing up until this point, I don't think we can speculate much more.
Okay, thank you for now, Tom Bateman in Jerusalem for us. Well, now let's bring you a special report from our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, who assesses what could happen next in Gaza and in Israel.
The beds were full when Mossab Sobieh was brought in wounded. Gaza's medics had to improvise. And a photo of premature babies at Shifa, the main hospital, alive after their incubators stopped working when the power ran out. All born in the cruelty of war. In the other Hamas-Israel wars, it would be time for a ceasefire by now and back to the same uneasy status quo until the next explosion. News teams can't cross into Gaza, so they come to
WHO, dire situation in the Gaza's biggest hospital. No mention of Hamas dug around that hospital. No mention of Israelis trying to evacuate those babies and stabilize them. No, we can't do that.
So they come to Sderot, the nearest Israeli town, to look in. Perhaps the biggest question is what happens in Gaza the day after? Who's going to be in charge? Israeli occupiers? An international force? Palestinians? If so, which Palestinians? This time it's different. The cost in lives from the Hamas attacks to Israel's response has thrust the conflict into unknown territory. With Israel on the attack, Prime Minister Netanyahu rejected America's day after plan. The US wants the Palestinian Authority rivals to Hamas to run Gaza after the fighting, and then a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Netanyahu opposes Palestinian independence and wants Israel to control security. Danny Yatom, once the Israeli spy chief, said that's why the Prime Minister snubbed Israel's most important ally.
Israel should not stay too long in the Gaza Strip. One. Secondly, it will not be able to leave the Gaza Strip unless all the abductees are in our hands, back in a peaceful situation, and we won, we succeed. Hamas, we won the war against Hamas. Now, there is a need to define what does it mean exactly to win. I define it as the collapse of Hamas as a body, as organization, losing its chain of command.
Israelis are united behind their army, but not their prime minister. These demonstrators outside his office in Jerusalem, the hardline Jewish nationalists who keep him in power. Another big question for Israelis is the future of their prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. He was a divisive figure before the 7th of October. And since then, a lot of Israelis have started to blame him for the security and intelligence and military errors that allowed Hamas to attack with such devastating consequences. There's anger that after Hamas killed and abducted so many, mostly Israeli civilians, military and intelligence chiefs accepted their share of the blame, and the prime minister did not. And pressure is growing for a ceasefire in exchange for hostages.
What is fighting Hamas? Okay, of course, the Hamas needs to be taken down. Okay, but the question of how to do it is also a significant question. And before I want to kill one single terrorist, I want each and every one of these people home. I want the 10-month-old baby home.
Here is one of those liberal Jews, right? That I was telling you about, or a liberal Israeli. I'm assuming she's Jewish. She seems Jewish. I don't think she's Christian. And that liberal mentality of hostage is more important than actually getting the job done. And that's exactly playing into the Iranian Hezbollah and Hamas cards. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Stupid liberal.
The 10-month-old baby home. I want that 86-year-old home. I want that more.
The 10-month-old baby home, and the 86-year-old woman home. Let's kick the can down the road for another 10 years. And so now there's going to be 500 babies that are killed and 500 86-year-olds killed.
I want that more than I want dead terrorists. Once they're home, we can finish the job.
The pain and hatred unleashed since the 7th of October might overwhelm all those who still believe in peace, not permanent war. Almost every day in the West Bank, they bury more Palestinians.
Today, this week's Parsha is dealing with Ishmael and, or not Ishmael. This week's Parsha is dealing with Esau and Jacob, Ishmael and Jacob. And, you know, the animalistic killing behavior of Esau. We really need to kill them all. Amazing.
In the West Bank, they bury more Palestinians killed in Israeli raids. This side of the occupied Palestinian territories is becoming the war's next battleground. The only answer Western leaders say is to revive the two-state solution, independent Palestine alongside Israel, a failed idea that survives only as a slogan. Sabri Saidam, an advisor to the Palestinian president, has heard it all before.
I think it's empty, it's meaningless if it continues to be this way. If you want to do things, don't just walk, don't just talk, you need to walk the talk and you need to implement things. If we continue with this sloganeering without any results whatsoever, we're getting nowhere.
When this war started, Joe Biden warned Israel not to be blinded by rage, as America was after the 9/11 attacks by Al-Qaeda. Now, Israel's tactics are alarming the Americans. They reiterate.
But we're the BBC liberal, and all war must be bad. All war must be unjustified. Meanwhile, if we didn't have war, we wouldn't even have a channel. Right, BBC?
The Americans. They reiterate support for Israel, but say too many Palestinians have been killed by the war machine they helped Israel build. Inside Gaza, Israeli military censors say we can't show the faces of soldiers we filmed. Senior Western diplomats, firm Israeli allies, told the BBC that ending the war and dealing with the aftermath will be difficult and messy. The wall between Jerusalem and the West Bank is a monument to the death of the last peace process. So what do we know? Well, events since the attacks of October the 7th have shown that this conflict is not something that Israel can manage and the rest of the world can ignore. There's also the history of a century of conflict between Arabs and Jews for control of this land, and that shows that there's no military solution. So if the current bloodshed doesn't lead to a new and serious attempt to make peace, then there'll be more wars for more generations. But war hardens hearts. In Gaza today, in a brief pause, thousands more Palestinians fled the Israeli offensive. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Jerusalem.
All right, the BBC.
Do you hear how the rhetoric escalates at
Now we're going to go inside Hamas weapons arsenal at kindergarten. At a kindergarten in Gaza. Isn't that lovely?
Fox News alert: as fighting intensifies between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, the IDF discovering weapons and explosives that belong to Hamas inside a kindergarten classroom in Gaza, as well as Hitler's manifesto in a child's home that Hamas was using as a terrorism hub. Our Alex Hogan is live on the ground in northern Israel with more on all of this. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Anita. Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie is here meeting with Israeli leaders, touring areas, and affirming U.S. support for Israel. It is day 37 of the war. So far, in the last 24 hours, we've seen the IDF continue to push forward in northern Gaza. They say that they were able to take in 20 members of Hamas for questioning. This comes after continued forces moving in by both land, air, and of course by sea. Israel's president also says that forces in the last day were able to recover what they say is Hitler's manifesto, Mein Kampf, in a children's living room used by Hamas in a military base. The IDF also said that it has seized as many as 6,000 weapons, some of those lately discovered in a kindergarten. The IDF also says that Hamas is targeting civilians by having these underground tunnels underneath hospitals. Well, that is where the conditions continue to deteriorate for civilians and patients in those hospitals, including infants. The major hospital in Gaza is the Al-Shifa hospital, where they say that they're running out of fuel. Today, Israel tried to deliver as many as 80 gallons of fuel, which they say was intercepted by Hamas and not delivered. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had this to say about that.
We offered actually last night to give them enough fuel to operate the hospital, operate the incubators and so on, because we have obviously no battle with patients or with civilians at all.
Meanwhile, we are in the northern part of Israel, and today this has been the most action-packed day that we have seen since the start of the war, with 21 people just within northern Israel wounded. This has already been the deadliest conflict here on the border of Israel and Lebanon since 2006. Anita.
All right, Alex Hogan, live on the ground in northern Israel. Alex, thank you, and please stay safe. Okay, so Mein Kampf was found down there. So anyway, Joey is over at the big board with a closer look at some of the weapons that were found at that Gaza kindergarten. Joey, what can you tell us about these weapons?
Yeah, we have a few pictures here of some of the weapons found. This really shows you a little bit about tactics and capabilities that Hamas has. It might give us a peek in the type of combat they anticipate. First, we see here are 100 what we call pineapple grenades. All of these are handheld grenades. You pull the pin, you throw them, and they have these little serrations on them where they break into fragmentation, all turning into dozens of bullets from each grenade. What this indicates is they're anticipating hand-to-hand close quarters combat. These can only go as far as you can throw them unless you booby trap them, then they become an IED, and all of this can be an IED, an improvised device. But these are some tools found. I really want to go into this and tell you a little bit about it. So I'm going to use the ability to draw here. So what you have here is a voltmeter or an ohm meter. This is used to test either blasting caps or electric circuits, probably in IEDs or certain types of munitions. But up here is really the part I want to talk to you about. What you have here, this is a circle, and these are mils or minutes of angle, and it's to a very fine detail. And down here you have a tool that's used to set the angle of something that you're going to use to indirect fire, to lob. And so what this shows is capability of mortars or other types of indirect fire, something you want to go for a long distance, but you also see it's kind of rudimentary. It's very simple stuff. A lot of this stuff down here you get at Home Depot. It's not super sophisticated. And that could help account for some of the rocket attacks that land inside Gaza itself because they're not using.
I don't think Home Depot actually is in Gaza. But I get his point.
Gaza itself because they're not using sophisticated tools. And then we'll keep moving here. Now, this is a little bit fuzzy, but I want to explain to you what this is.
Another reason why you go to DrPaulCottrell's channel, all right? When I was over at Catholic Charities managing the portfolio and doing the corporate finance stuff, right? And one of the head board members, there were different committees, subcommittees, and financial board, and then executive board level. And there was also for Catholic Charities, and then there was also board members for the archdioceses, right? One of those key board members was Lagone, and he's the founder, or one of the founders of Home Depot. All right, the guy's a major fucking asshole. Behind the scenes, the guy is a total fucking asshole. But you wouldn't know that unless you actually heard it from Dr. Paul Cottrell. Self-centered little piece of shit.
A little bit fuzzy, but I'm going to explain to you what this is. And so the first thing I'm going to highlight here, I'm going to use red. This is the color yellow, which indicates it was probably produced by Iran. What this is an RPG. This is the round that goes inside the launcher. What you have here is essentially you'll have a launch motor back here, then you'll have a flight motor in it, and then your explosives are housed in the back half here. That's your explosives. This is your warhead. The reason why that's important to note is as I clear this and move to the next one, you'll see what these motors are. And so what you see here, I can tell by the color, this bright green one and the dark green one. We have launch motors and flight motors. What that means, RPGs are capable of going up to 900 yards. So you could actually use them as indirect fire and use RPGs from a further distance away. Having the motors that are capable of that shows that might be a part of their battle plan. So all of this shows you a little bit of what they're capable of and a little bit of what they might be trying to do as far as strategy, and that helps Israel prepare for what they'll see.
Joey, so as you know, we've heard IDF say that Hamas utilizes civilian locations, specifically sensitive ones like hospitals, as this case, kindergartens, and even places of worship, to hide some of their weaponry. For example, what would happen if one of these were to accidentally go off in the kindergarten classroom.
Yeah, everything I just showed you is equivalent to a hand grenade if it goes off the wrong way. If it goes off the correct way, it could take down an entire building. I mean, Timothy McVeigh took out the entire Oklahoma City building with a couple of barrels of ammonium nitrate and fuel oxidizer. A lot of munitions stored in one place that sympathetically detonate could take that whole building down, like a hospital or an apartment complex.
Wow. Joey, thank you for that very thorough explanation. Appreciate that.
But Hamas is all lily white. All lily white, right? All right. I know that when you watch my channel, you start to get high blood pressure because of all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world. And I'm very concerned about your lipid profile. So, to improve your lipid profile, make sure that you start taking omega-3, all right? The whole point is that you want to increase your HDL and you want to lower your LDL, okay? HDL is your good cholesterol, LDL is your bad cholesterol. There's some nuances to that, but take omega-3, it's going to improve your lipid profile. When you improve your lipid profile, you're reducing the chances of cardiovascular disease. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the best toothpaste that you can buy. Get a few of these toothpaste tubes, right? It's made out of structural nanosilver, no fluoride. It neutralizes pathogens, whitens the teeth, freshens the breath, reduces gum inflammation, reduces cardiovascular disease and valvular disease. When you have proper oral hygiene, you're going to reduce chances of valvular disease. Get the silver gel, neutralizes pathogens. You put it around your mouth, around your nose, inside your nostrils, lightly coated around your eyes, lightly coat your ears, in your ears. And it will stay active for about 5 hours. You put it around your hands. You can also use it as a skincare product. Keep it on your skin overnight, and then exfoliate, and you'll notice a difference in the quality of your skin, the health of your skin. Another great product that I have on my store to improve your REM cycle sleep is taking my Good Night formula. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com. Go to the store, get the Good Night formula. It's going to give you the rested sleep that you need. It'll get you into that 3 REM cycles. You want basically 2 to 3 REM cycles a night. You want to be going to bed on a regular basis, and it'll slow down the aging process, and you're going to feel more rested. You're going to have better memory, and you're going to actually detoxify your body, because if you don't get the proper sleep, you're not going to be detoxifying your body. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and also get the lignans. This helps with hormonal health for males and females, and it helps to boost your immune system. If you boost your immune system, don't you think that you'd actually improve your chances of fighting cancer? Probably. So this is a powder. Take it every day. I mix it with hummus, and that will improve your health. It's part of the protocol. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Now let's drop into Al Jazeera here.
When I'm designing, I like intentional spaces, but I like intentional spaces.
A lot of those UN staff were killed also in their homes, in their beds. It wasn't just a question of targeting or mistargeting and so on and so forth. It's the indiscriminate nature of the bombings that the United States and others need to talk about and oppose and allow the United Nations to carry their work peacefully. Now, the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, I think was quite right when he said the UN as a building on 42nd Street in New York, the UN as a staff, it doesn't have the power and it doesn't have the money. But what it does have is a voice. And that voice echoes the Charter of the United Nations, which is at the essence of what makes us all a community. we as human beings on this earth, we come together under a charter of all our nations together under certain values and principles and certain laws and the laws of war, the Fourth Geneva Convention and so on and so forth. These are the ones that the United Nations stands for. And lowering the flag is not just a voice, it's a scream from the United Nations. Doesn't have the money, doesn't have the power, but it has the scream. It is screaming at all of us to stop the madness.
But what sort of impact do we see happening from the Israelis? We have, for example, the Israeli ambassador to the UN trying to tarnish the whole of UNRWA working inside Gaza as being Hamas infiltrators, saying many of the people killed were Hamas members. How much damage does that do?
You would expect that after decades of lies that this would no longer work, right? But we are faced continuously, whether it's journalists, officials, and others, with Israelis just making statements, usually false. But even when they're not false, they're just made at the moment of something happening, and they immediately distance themselves from responsibility, which you would expect them to do, right? I mean, that's what countries do. They lie. Diplomats lie for their countries, right? For the interests of their countries. We expect that. But the problem of so many buying into it, right? Knowing that there's a track record and knowing there is a tendency, especially in cases like this, where the Israelis are going to lie, but it doesn't mean that each and every time one of them, utters another, falsehood, that we all need to jump and start asking each other nonstop the same questions again and again and again, as if that is the agenda of the day. No, the agenda of the day is the one that was mystified when the Israelis lied. The Israelis want us to look right when we need to look center and left at what exactly is happening on the ground in Gaza. The staff in Gaza, living with their families, sleeping at night with their children, they are not targets, even if they were Hamas members. They are not targets. They're not supposed to be targets. Just like Israeli soldiers not fighting, they should not be targets. I mean, then what are the laws for, right? But the Israelis keep uttering this, one falsehood after another, repeated, unfortunately, by important people around the world, like the U.S. Secretary of State, the U.S. President, and so on and so forth, about hospital.
But the Palestinians are lying, and Hamas is not lying. I tell you, these people. I'll tell you, if I was the president of the United States, I would demand the military to dismantle the UN brick by brick, put it on a barge, and dump it in the Atlantic Ocean.
Being basis for Hamas, not only under, but in and under, which means that an entire workforce of the health and the education sectors in the schools and the hospitals are all complicit with Hamas hiding ammunitions and fighters and so on. They are falsehoods. And we don't need to pay that much attention and lose focus of what is important.
Okay, well, Bashar, for the moment, thanks very much for joining us here in the studio. Now, the Pentagon has confirmed that US warplanes have carried out 2 more airstrikes inside Syria. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says Iran-backed armed groups in the cities of Abu Kamal and Mayadin were the targets. He added that the strikes were in response to recent attacks against US troops in Iraq and Syria.
Last night, our US forces conducted precision strikes in eastern Syria against 2 facilities that are used by Iran's IRGC and affiliated groups. I just want to remind you that
we are the United States are playing footsie on this. Surgical strikes, special forces. We're afraid to get the job done. This is another classic example of what I'm saying. We did surgical strikes in Syria. Yeah, we did surgical strikes in Syria. We got special forces out on the ground.
these strikes are intended to disrupt and degrade the freedom of action and capabilities of these groups. which are directly responsible for.
You really think that a surgical strike is going to do that? Bullshit.
Attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria.
Now to New York, where multiple protests have been held in recent weeks calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Despite many being organized by Jewish peace activists, protesters have faced accusations of anti-Semitism. On Sunday,
Didn't I say that a big part of the problem is the ultra-liberal Jew? And that's part of the reason why Israel is getting cursed. And the ultra-Jew doesn't realize that this ultra-liberalism with promoting Palestine and placating to Iran is only, those people are only going to eat you alive. The ultra-liberal Jew is a big part of the problem.
West addressed a crowd in front of the UN. He stressed that support for Palestinians does not mean hating anyone else.
And don't let anybody tell you that because you love Palestinians and Palestinian babies that you hate somebody else. It just doesn't follow what our brothers we.
Cornell West. Remember what I was telling you about in Sieber Hall? We had this medical neuro class when I was working on my master's over at Harvard. And we were about ready to take a test. I think it was the second test of the semester. And I believe it's in room 102. And he had a lecture going on before us, and students wanted to go in and study before the test. And we were just waiting and waiting, and the whole class was waiting outside. And everything is the old style. That building is the old style lecture building, and everything's like wood floors, wood paneling, right? Actually, the seating is like a velvet felt kind of material. And he was talking before our class on deconstructionism. All right, how to dismantle the system and rise up and for socialism and all this crap. This boy would not shut the fuck up. And our teacher had to go to him and say, we have a test. And eventually they left the room and we started sitting down. We didn't have that much time to study because he wouldn't shut up. So we were starting to take the test. And he's out in the hallway because of the wooden panels, it echoes in Sieber Hall on the first floor. And you'd hear him talk. So the teacher had to go out and tell him to shut up. This is the classic example of a fucking crazy liberal. The only way to solve the problem that should have been handled way back in biblical times is to destroy Hamas, destroy Hezbollah, destroy Iran. Biblical borders for Israel are reestablished and the Temple Mount is rebuilt. And the Dome of the Rock is either dismantled peacefully or blown up. Crazy liberal.
Hate Jewish brothers. We don't hate Jewish sisters. We don't hate Jewish siblings. We love, we hate a vicious Israeli occupation.
Yeah. Now take it one more step further. He's going to promote reparations in the United States. This is the problem with crazy liberals. Now look at that. Look at that face. Look at that face. Does he look like a nice guy?
Australian political activist, also an independent presidential candidate for 2024. And he joins us now here on Al Jazeera live from New York. Good to have you with us. I find it interesting, Cornell, that when you say you support the Palestinians there, you felt that you also had to highlight that it doesn't mean you hate Jews. Is the debate so polarized there that you need to make that clarification?
Oh, absolutely. You see, I myself, I come from a great black people, been terrorized, traumatized, and hated for 400 years. Jews themselves have been hated, terrorized, and traumatized for 2,000 years. Palestinians have been hated, terrorized, and traumatized by Israelis for 75 years and more. So you're dealing with two groups that have been hated, terrorized, and traumatized, and you have to be clear that it has nothing to do with anti-Jewish hatred when you talk about love of precious Palestinian brothers and sisters who are undergoing a bold.
It's about the Temple Mount. The era of the Dome of the Rock is starting to sunset. And I am not wrong on this.
Barbaric, genocidal attack and assault on their bodies, on their dignity, on their humanity. And
oh, let's talk about deconstructionism, Professor West. Let's talk about reparations, Professor West. See, what it is these liberals are trying to embed themselves with their socialistic policies for years, to the point where they are going to go after religion. They go after the family unit. They go after they go after and try to change the language to the point where, you know, they have this gender fluidity stuff, and that if you don't use the proper pronoun, you may get ticketed or sued or whatever. Crazy liberals need to be dealt with. And the problem is us conservatives have not been forceful enough on checkmating these crazy liberals. I mean, just look at his freaking hair. He's crazy.
Israeli government is so easy for right-wing conservative folk in the American society and empire to accuse me and others of being anti-Jewish simply because we
American Empire. See, American Empire. I'm telling you, that boy wants to deconstruct the United States. And he had a lecture at the Sieber Hall about it.
Very clear, but it won't stop our commitment. It won't in any way dampen our fire. We want our Palestinian brothers and sisters to know we care for you. We're concerned about you. We're raising our voices. We get in the streets. We go into jail. And if the United States government that is shot through with its moral...
Just remember, it's the same protests that were going on over the weekend, going right to Grand Central Station, pulling down the American flag, smashing up stuff, vandalizing police cars, and shouting the destruction of Israel. That's what he represents. So us conservatives need to wake the fuck up. He is part of the problem.
Bankruptcy is spiritual obscenity, and if criminality doesn't hear us, then we are going to oppose our own government.
What good, actually, at the end of the day, does that do, coming out and saying that you support?
I'm telling you, he's a problem. He's a problem.
Palestinians, how actually can you make any changes to the situation that the people in Gaza are facing right now?
Well, one is put pressure so that we have both a ceasefire, we have an exchange of hostages and Palestinian political prisoners and those who are detained in Israeli jails, and then the end of the siege and the end of the occupation that gets at the very source and core of this whole situation. And
No. Professor West, the core of the situation is the Dome of the Rock is going down. That's the core of the situation. Wake the fuck up, man.
It's also a matter of one's own personal integrity. How do we live in such a barbaric world and have some sense of morality and spirituality? How do we remain committed to justice and love, not hatred and revenge?
Some spirituality. How do you think you're going to have spirituality when we're all going towards the Messianic era, and we all know what that means? And believe me, Esau and Ishmael ain't going to have the ownership of that Temple Mount. Spirituality. All right, Reverend.
But justice and love, given the overwhelming grimness of this situation that we see with our precious Palestinians having to undergo this kind of barbarity.
How are you using your platform now as an independent presidential candidate to boost your message?
Well, one is we have to shatter the lies. There's been attempts to rationalize and justify Israeli occupation, Israeli subjugation, Israeli degradation, and we have to be critical of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. If they're engaging in killing innocent people, those are war crimes. I'm critical of that. If they're degrading Jews, if they're anti-Jewish, I'm critical of that. But I'm keeping track right now of the structures and the institutions. And as a candidate, I want to rise above the hatred, rise above the revenge, and part of the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer, Rabbi Heschel, and Edward Said is what? The accent justice. The accent justice. What does justice look like? Equal dignity, equal rights, equal access to resources of Palestinians and Jews in that region of the world.
When you look at the Democratic Party right now, what do you see? Do you see a party that has these values, or do you see the divisions? I'm thinking particularly of the silencing of Rashida Tlaib. She's the only Palestinian American in Congress, and she was silenced recently when she was trying to speak up on these issues.
Yeah, well, I stand with my dear sister Rashida, very much so. But no, when I look at the Democrat,
From the river to the sea is why she was censored. It's genocide. All right, Professor West.
party, I see bankruptcy. It's ethically bankrupt, but it's willing to enable genocide. The Israeli government willing to enact it, U.S. government willing to enable it. We have to be very, very clear. We have to be very, very honest. We have to be candid. And we have to speak very, very fearlessly. And unfortunately, we even have a whole wave of Black leaders who are so scared and intimidated and afraid of APEC. They're afraid of Anti-Defamation League. They're afraid of any kind of pressure brought to bear on them so that they don't have their own status. Where's their commitment to truth? Where's their commitment to justice? What kind of integrity do they have? Can they put a smile on the face of Martin King and Malcolm X? Can they put a smile on the face of Ella Baker? Those are the moral and spiritual standards, and I want to be true to the standards of moral and spiritual greatness, which have to do with our common humanity, that have to do with our precious humanity. And that's the challenge right now in this moment of overwhelming grimness.
One that you are rising.
Too much apple pie in the sky, Professor West. The reality is the Temple Mount is getting rebooted, and we're the generation be a stepping stone to make that happen. But mark my words, that boy is promoting reparations.
Well, to Cornel West, many thanks indeed for taking the time.
Get a haircut.
Here on Al Jazeera. Now, a major shake-up in the UK's Conservative government sees the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, sacked. That comes after she triggered anger by...
To help support my work, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nano silver soap. Because you don't want to look like Professor West. He doesn't look like he uses structural nano silver soap. And he says obscenities like deconstructionism and reparations. He needs his mouth washed out with soap. Structural nano silver soap go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the different varieties of structural nano silver soap. This one happens to be oatmeal spice, but I also have lavender and peppermint and a few others. So please go to the store and get a few bars of these. High quality soap. You need to take magnesium and zinc every day. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and it's going to help with your immune system. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose of this. But you should be taking magnesium and zinc every day. Those are some of the many products that I have on my store. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Please help support my work by sharing the videos, making sure that you subscribe to all my channels. All the links are in the description. Make sure you subscribe to all 6 of my channels. I have 3 on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. And please help support my news coverage by donating. On my website, on the homepage at the very bottom, you can donate through Stripe or PayPal. You can also donate through Buy Me a Coffee. Link is in the description of this video. Or you can be a paid subscriber to my Patreon channel that helps support my work. Thank you for your support and have a nice day.